Okay, we're talking about LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. It was synthesized by a Swiss chemist by the name of Hoffman in 1939. CIA bought it and brought it back to the United States. They tried to weaponize it, and they couldn't do it. They tried really hard in a project known as MK Ultra, and you may have heard of MK Ultra before. Timothy Leary, of course, is the one that decided that the whole world needed LSD. Of course, he died, I don't know, he died about 10 years ago. They shot his ashes up into space. I don't know what that has to do with anything. It's a little strange. It was made illegal in 1966. It hit the market, it hit the streets about 1958. And then in 1966 it was made illegal. LSD is easily manufactured if you're a chemist. Just about any chemist can make it. It's mostly made in the San Francisco Bay Area of Northern California. Northern California also has a reputation for growing marijuana. Humboldt Green is the type of marijuana they grow there, which is a really strong, it has a lot of THC in it. It takes a very small amount of LSD to produce a reaction. We're going to talk about exactly how much it does take in just a second. The entire United States uses about 11 pounds of LSD a year. That's not very much. LSD, I mean, you could carry it around in your backpack. A whole year's supply of everybody in the United States, as strange as that may seem. LSD is one of the substances that you cannot overdose on. Marijuana is another one. Psilocybin is another one, magic mushrooms. But you could drink a whole gallon of the stuff and you wouldn't overdose. It's one of those deals where if you take a little bit, you have a reaction. If you take a lot of it, you have exactly the same reaction as if you took a little bit. So you only have one reaction. The chemical is usually dissolved in alcohol. It's placed on paper. I was watching, what was I watching last night? Wait a minute, Samantha Bee. I think that's what she calls her show. Anyway, there were two guys in a museum, and they dropped acid at the end of their segment, and it gave all of the statues in the museum color, which is what they wanted to do. 10 to 50 micrograms is the usual dosage on blotter paper. Doesn't take very much. You can only have one reaction from it. You can take, like I said before, you can take a lot. It doesn't really make any difference. Doesn't make it longer. Doesn't make your trip longer. There's just one reaction that you can possibly have. The popularity of LSD has waxed and waned over time. When I was young, in the 1960s and 1970s, remember it was made illegal in 1966. Kids started using it in the early 60s. It was real popular for a while. They tried to match LSD with other substances. There was a rumor going around that if you cooked banana peels and scraped the inside, that white stuff off the inside, it was hallucinogenic. I've never heard of anybody overdosing on banana peels. So in the 1960s and 1970s, it was really popular. It was part of the hippie movement. People would try to find LSD. There were a lot of college kids that were doing this kind of stuff, so there were a bunch of chemists in the group, and of course they could make LSD. Sometimes they made mistakes and killed people. The drug became less popular in the 1980s when people were wearing mullets. I don't know if the mullet had anything to do with it. Made a comeback in the 1990s, became a rave drug in the 1990s, so there were people dropping acid. The problem with acid is that the trip lasts for such a long time, and of course it's difficult to control. There was a drug raid in Kansas that virtually took the drug off the market because that's where it was being manufactured. at the time in a in a farmhouse in Kansas. They made the drug rate and nobody had any LSD for that year. It's kind of interesting. Its popularity today is with the same rave crowd for people who want to experience a high. It's better, well, I don't know if it's better. It's different than MDMA, of course. Better, it's different than ecstasy. LSD is used in such small amounts that it is normally detected, it's not normally detected by standard drug testing. I've been in on drug testing before. For the longest time we couldn't identify marijuana. We could identify opiates and amphetamines and barbiturates, but we couldn't identify marijuana. Then we developed a test where we could identify marijuana, but we've never been able to identify LSD. It's just too small. So, I mean, what we're talking about is 10 to 50 micrograms, and that's not very much at all. So if it gets into your system, we don't know it. If you're spacing out, if you're tripping out on LSD, we have no way of finding out. And of course, there's nothing we can give you that will bring you off of your trip. LSD is remarkably potent, creating a reaction with just 25 1/millionth of a gram. That's how much it is. So you can imagine we can't possibly look for this in your blood. If we draw your blood, if we have a saliva specimen, if we have a urine specimen, we're not going to find it. We're just not going to find it. There's just too little of it. It causes the individual to be spacey, decreases your perception of time. A lot of times if you talk to people that have been on a trip, they'll tell you that they were on the trip for 5 or 6 days, and the reality is they're only on the trip for like 10 or 12 hours. Gives you mild euphoria. Its effects appear about 15 to 60 minutes after ingestion. So you drop the acid and it takes about that long to get into your brain. The effects peak at 2 to 4 hours. The effects last for 6 to 8 hours. Users return to their normal state after about 10 to 12 hours. After the 6 to 8 hours of tripping, what normally happens is they just go to sleep. But if you wake them up while they're asleep, they will still be on the trip, as curious as that is. A lot of times we would get these individuals in the emergency room, and it was usually after the really good part of their trip, or sometimes it was during their trip. If you have bad thoughts when you start your trip, then you'll have a bad trip. If you have happy thoughts when you start your trip, you'll have a good trip. This is one of the reasons why people will do something really interesting, like they'll drop acid and then they'll go to a movie like Fantasia, which is fairly psychedelic anyway, or they'll go to a cartoon. And of course, the cartoon, they have to be really careful, because if there's any bad parts of that cartoon, they'll start a bad trip. They tried to do that with what's the movie? Bambi. But remember, Bambi's mother gets shot in the movie, and of course they start screaming in the audience. That's not good. Anyway, withdrawal from LSD is more a mental state than a physical dependence. They may experience a downer, and that's where the word downer came from people. From the hippies dropping acid and having a bad trip, which they referred to as a downer. So now this has become part of our nomenclature in the United States. As you can see, the fatal doses that it takes to kill somebody, heroin is fairly easy to overdose on. Nutmeg is second, as odd as that sounds. Datura, isobutyl nitrate, GHB, dextromethorphan, this is the cough syrup stuff. Alcohol is right there. Cocaine, MDMA, codeine, mescaline, rohypnol, ketamine, dimethyltryptamine, kava kava, and then of course the 3 drugs, marijuana, LSD, and psilocybin. You cannot overdose on them. It would take too much to overdose. We have had 3 deaths on marijuana. One of them was a 10-month-old baby who had an asthmatic reaction because her parents smoked a lot of pot in a relatively closed-in area. Anyway, LSD effects include a rise in your blood pressure and heart rate, a rise in body temperature, dizziness, dilated pupils, sweating, after-image light trails known as trailing, the trailing phenomena, which is, if you watch any videos, especially music videos from the 1970s, you'll see this whole trailing phenomena thing. Psychedelic, yes sir.
Black Sabbath?
Earth, Wind, and Fire used to do it. Sometimes Jackson 5 would do that whole trail thing, as bizarre as it may seem. Sensory distortions, you see sounds, you feel smells, you hear colors, you get this whole synesthesia thing. The individual has a dreamy effect, there's a dreamy effect. Depersonalization, altered mood, impaired concentration, and motivation. LSD activates the locus coeruleus, which causes the release of extra amounts of norepinephrine, so you feel like you can conquer the world. Feel really good. The extra norepinephrine enhances your alertness, causing the illusion of heightened awareness and introspection. It's a hormonal reaction. You think that you can cure cancer, that you can force everybody to be peaceful. It gives you really odd illusions. LSD trippers often will lose their ability to express themselves verbally, which is really irritating because they'll come into the emergency room and you ask them what the problem is, and they'll just start, they'll start grunting at you or mumbling to you. And they're not saying any words, and they're not even trying to say words. They've lost the ability to speak. And this lasts for an extended length of time. This is one of the ways we used to be able to tell if they were actually on LSD, because we had no way of testing them to find out what their problem actually was, because you can't find LSD in people's blood or their urine. The greatest danger is the impaired reasoning that the individual displays and the loss of judgment. Remember, they feel like they can do anything. Now, this is okay. I mean, it's really nice to have a high self-esteem, but jumping off a building and flying is not one of the things that they can do. So the accidental suicide is very, very common with LSD. It's also very common with PCP. So, you know, this is one of the really serious problems, especially kids. So let's say you've got a kid that is being bullied at school. So he drops acid, and it makes him feel like Superman. It makes him feel like he can do anything in the world. And so he gets on top of the building and he jumps just like Superman would. Everybody's seen Superman fly. Well, whoops. Now he goes splat, and I'm the one that has to clean him up, or clean up the mess. That irritates me more than anything else. I hate to have to do any work. Okay. The user can suffer acute anxiety reactions to LSD known as bad trips. This is especially common for new users who aren't aware of the intensity of the euphoria or the possibility of panic that can be induced by the drug. Most people don't drop acid alone. They usually drop acid with somebody else. They will have a trailblazer. They will have somebody they should have somebody there who can help them through all the rough spots. So that's one of the things that they suggest that you do. You don't drop acid alone. You drop acid with somebody else. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad trip. And if you have a bad trip, of course, now it's hallucinatory. So you'll see all kinds of interesting creatures, monsters of one ilk or another. But if you have somebody playing, happy music or pleasant music or whatever, you wouldn't want to play Black Sabbath, of course. No. So you have to be really careful as to what you're experiencing before and during your LSD trip. It causes depersonalization, acute anxiety, paranoia, where the individual thinks that everybody's after them. especially if they're watching their own television show or listening to Black Sabbath or whatever. Fear of loss of control, delusions of persecution, feelings of grandeur, of course, and this is what makes them jump off of buildings. Suicide by mistake is extremely common, and it's really kind of tragic. It's usually people that, and this is another reason why they shouldn't trip alone. They need to be with somebody so that they can, keep them from jumping off the building, which isn't the easiest thing in the world. Some people are smarter than everybody else, and they're the ones that jump off a building. Those are the ones you can't control. Those are also the ones you can't stop from driving if they're drunk. They think that they can do anything, so they'll jump in their car and take off, run their car off the road, and slam into a wall or something. LSD can be dangerous for people with pre-existing mental conditions or mental instability. Using LSD can aggravate the already existing conditions, leading to more severe mental disturbances. Sometimes they will be pre-psychotic. They take LSD and now they're in total psychosis. They've kicked themselves into psychosis. Use of LSD has also led to experiencing their mental illness at a younger age. LSD can lead to relapse for an individual recovering from a psychotic episode or major depression. It'll kick them right back in. Not the smartest thing in the world. This isn't something that you use to help your mental illness. It will make your mental illness worse. It's the same way with marijuana, unfortunately. Marijuana is good for you. I mean, it makes you feel good while you're smoking, but when you're not smoking, you feel worse. And of course, that's when you kick yourself back into your mental illness. Individuals without mental illnesses might be thrown into temporary or prolonged psychotic reactions or severe depression that requires treatment. Some individuals have been known to experience prolonged trips that can be emotionally crippling and can last for years. That sounds like fun. Let's trip for the next 2 years. Hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, or HPPD, is re-experiencing the mental flashbacks of sensations from a previous trip. Now, normally these flashbacks are relatively pleasant, but they don't have to be. You may have an individual that every time they're feeling negative emotions, they'll have a negative flashback, or they'll have a flashback of a bad trip. If they're having positive emotions, their flashback will be more pleasant. Usually it's a bad trip. So you're feeling stressed and all of a sudden you trip back to, or you go back to a bad trip. HPPD can occur months or even years after the last use of LSD. The flashbacks recreate the original experience and can be triggered by stress, use of any other psychoactive substance like marijuana, or from exercise. Now, why in the world would exercise cause you to trip? I mean, to have a flashback. What is it about exercise that would make you trip or a flashback? What is it?
The sweat.
I'm sorry? Sweat?
The endorphins?
Endorphins, yeah. It's the endorphins. It's a hormone, yeah. Yeah, it's the endorphins. As exciting as all that is. So if you're one of these flashers, if you're one of these individuals that have flashbacks, then you can't exercise because you're afraid that, especially, you think you're getting runner's high, and all of a sudden you flash back to some god-awful LSD trip you had 15 years ago. Not pleasant. HPPD seems to have a strong hereditary component and results in anxiety and panic, of course. Yeah. Some people suffer from long-term intermittent continuous HPPD where their flashbacks occur on a chronic basis. The type of HPPD may resolve itself in 5 years or persist indefinitely, resulting in difficulty reading, memory problems, color confusion, halos around objects, especially people. So they think that they can read people's aura. This becomes their aura. So they think they can read their aura. In reality, it's just a flashback. I know, how much fun is that? Ooh, your aura's all pink today. Visual after images, they see trails with everything that moves, especially things that move rapidly. So they have a hard time driving because they see a lot of after images with the cars, anything moving very rapidly. Intensified colors. I've had people that, let's see, how can I explain this? They would go to races, track races, or just what is going to happen, and they'd watch people run because they would see, they'd see trails. It's weird. They like to go to drag races, and they like to go see watch people run. As stupid as that sounds. Macropsia and micropsia. Objects appear abnormally large or small, which is just bizarre. Illusions of movement, geometric pseudo-hallucinations, flashes of color, imagined images, and floaters in your eyes. We all have floaters in our eyes anyway, but LSD seems to give you more floaters, and of course, now you think that you're tripping anyway when you see these floaters just wandering across your eye. HPD can be caused by other psychedelics besides LSD, though it is most common with LSD, MDMA and MDA, Mesaline, DMT, PCP, of course, which is a fairly strong psychedelic, but even marijuana and psilocybin. So despite the fact that you can't overdose on marijuana or psilocybin or LSD, they cause flashbacks. They can cause flashbacks. Flashbacks occur in 23 to 64% of regular LSD users. That's a lot if you think about it. So most people that have dropped acid and drop acid on a regular basis, most of these individuals will have flashbacks. Zoloft, clonidine, and naltrexone have been used to treat your HPPD successfully. LSD does not produce compulsive drug-seeking behavior, thus it is not considered addictive. The problem is, of course, tripping. You're going to be tripping for 10 to 12 hours. Actually, the good part lasts for 2 to 4 hours, but half a day is a long time, even for for somebody that's looking for a high. 10 to 12 hours is a bit much. So it's not something that you want to do every day. It's something that you do on the weekends. It's something that you do when you're at a concert or at a movie, at the right movie anyway. You don't want to do it at the wrong movie. Tolerance develops rapidly, and some users have reported as many as 500 trips in their lifetime. What does this do to their brains? If they don't have HPPD, they probably don't think anything about it. And also, of course, and this was Timothy Leary. Remember, Timothy Leary experienced an LSD trip, decided everybody needed to do it, so he gave it to the rest of the world. But he was not an individual that suffered from HPPD. You can have flashbacks after one trip. Other individuals use it excessively, and these individuals may not ever have a trip, and that's what happened with Timothy Leary. The dependence is probably psychological, of course, instead of physical. So it's really kind of a dangerous thing to do, unless you want to trip. There are 75 different varieties of mushrooms that contain the active ingredients psilocybin and psilocin. They grow in Mexico, they grow in the United States, in this portion of the United States. We see them in South America. There's magic mushrooms that grow in Southeast Asia. There are some that grow in Southern Europe, the islands of Crete and Cyprus. And we've seen them since recorded history, since the beginning of recorded history. They were especially important in the Aztec and Toltec religions in Mexico and Central America. They are used with some of the indigenous peoples in South America, especially in the Amazon. These substances are still being used among Mazatec, Cole, Lacandan Mayan shamans. When we were down in Guatemala, they were going to have a ceremony where they used some of this stuff, but we didn't go because we had to leave, so we didn't get to go. One of the people on our trip wanted to stay, and she said that she would find her own way home, you know, that kind of thing. Of course, if she'd gone to this thing, who knows if she'd ever found her way home. Mayans of Guatemala. The chemical structure of psilocybin is very similar to LSD. However, mushrooms vary widely in strength, and some have as much as 10 times the level of psilocybin as the weak ones do. Fresh mushrooms are more potent than dried ones, and this was the deal. The mushrooms were brand new. When we were there in the wintertime. Their winter, our summer. The mushrooms had just come out, and that was the deal. And they always had a big ceremony when the mushrooms first came out. And this was when were we there? We were there in June. So it was the very beginning of their winter. And that's when the mushrooms came out. It's nice and warm. It wasn't too bad. It was real moist. Anyway, the idea was that the mushrooms were really potent right now. And the problem was, and of course they wouldn't let her go, except that we were on a schedule, and that wasn't the important part. But the problem was that if we had let her go to that ceremony, then potentially we wouldn't have been able to get her out of there for a couple days because of the reaction she would have had to the mushrooms. Psilocybin is broken down into psilocin in the stomach. Psilocybin is twice as potent as psilocin and crosses the blood-brain barrier more readily. Psychic effects begin at dosages of 30 to 60 milligrams. The effects last for 3 to 6 hours, and the effects are nausea and other physical responses such as psychedelic effects begin. The altered states of consciousness, changes in sight, hearing, taste, and touch, visceral effects, less dissociation and panic than with LSD. And it's rare for you to have a bad trip on magic mushrooms. It's not nearly as common with the magic mushrooms as LSD. LSD, it's either good or bad. But with psilocybin, the good isn't nearly as strong, but there is no bad. So you usually just have all these really strange hallucinations with psilocybin. Problem is telling which one is the good, which are magic mushrooms and which are poison mushrooms. That's the biggest problem. Many of the psychedelic effects are caused by the disruption of neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. Oversensitizes the senses, of course. Some people try to harvest their own magic mushrooms, but the similarity between mushrooms that contain psilocybin and those that are poisonous make picking them too dangerous. Where was I? I was in Lubbock, Texas. When I was in the military. We had a guy that came in who thought he was ingesting magic mushrooms. He had been down south in Texas. And thought he was picking magic mushrooms, and he did. Some of his mushrooms were magic mushrooms, but some of his mushrooms were toadstools, and he ingested quite a bit. He fried them up, and that's what you do with other mushrooms in other parts of the world. And he got some poisonous mushrooms, and he died. And of course, we got him. We got him before he died, and we pumped his stomach, but by that time it had already moved into his small intestine. There was nothing we could do. You can't pump somebody's small intestine. He was gone. So we got to watch him convulse and die, which is always fun. Ibogaine comes from the African shrub Tabermanthe iboga. At low doses, the substance acts as a stimulant. At higher doses, the substance produces a long-acting psychedelic-like catatonic reaction that can last up to 2 days. Sounds fun, doesn't it? Catatonic reactions. Ibogaine is used by the Bwiti tribe of Gabon to remain motionless while hunting. So they take this stuff so that they can sit there without moving. Otherwise, it will warn their whatever they're hunting that they're there. These hunters also claim to have ancestral visions while under the drug spell, but that's the Pyote tribe of Gabon. This drug has been considered as a treatment for heroin, alcohol, and cocaine addiction as it reduces withdrawal symptoms. However, neurotoxicity has been observed with its use in this capacity. Morning glory seeds. Really? Flowers? Come on, let's get real. Let's eat some flowers. Morning glories. They contain lysergic acid amide, which can be used, of course, to make lysergic acid diethylmide. Lysergic acid amide is has about a tenth the potency as LSD. It requires several hundred morning glory seeds to get an effect, and this usually causes a great deal of nausea. So you have to grow your own morning glory seeds. You can't buy them at the store. The seeds at the store, they dip in poison. So if you try to ingest them, you will start vomiting relatively violently, projectile vomiting, which is always fun. The effects of morning glory seeds include sensory disturbances and mood changes, nausea and vomiting. There you go. Let's all eat seeds and puke. Drowsiness, headaches, and chills. Not something very pleasant. Not as strong a reaction as LSD, so maybe not the best idea in the world. DMT was first synthesized in 1931 and is found in several South American trees, vines, shrubs, and mushrooms. Dimethyltryptamine. The psychedelic substance in DMT is similar in structure to psilocin and is usually smoked, snorted, or injected as it is deactivated by stomach acids and causes visual hallucinations, loss of awareness of the individual's surroundings. This stuff is blue. The color is blue, and it's almost a turquoise blue. So what they'll do is they'll blow the stuff into your nose. And of course you can't do anything with it if somebody shoots something into your nose. And then you have your hallucinations, which is always exciting. Anyway, that's what they do that's what the natives in the Amazonian region of South America do. The high lasts for about 10 to 60 minutes. It's a similar response, comes from the venom of the Sonoran desert toad. The Sonoran desert is just south of here, isn't it? Yeah, there you go. So, strange hippies will go around licking toads. I know, this is so weird. Let's go lick toads and have a hallucinogenic reaction. There's a desert toad that... There was a movie, and it spit this stuff at this guy, and he suddenly started hallucinating. That was strange. It was an odd movie. I don't remember the name of it, but it was so exciting that, well, I already knew that the Sonoran desert toad, if you licked them, you can have a reaction to it.
And look for vortexes.
Vortexes? You feel the vortex. Ooh, it's right here where I am. Wherever I am, that's where the vortex is. What else are we talking about? We're talking about the indole psychedelics. Foxy and Amt are two psychedelic tryptamines. These drugs aren't very popular, but have been found at raves in Arizona, California, Florida, and New York. The effects of the tryptamines are similar to other rave drugs. Euphoria, empathy, visual and auditory disturbances. Formication, it makes your skin itch, makes you feel like you've got bugs all over you, which is always a lot of fun. Paranoia, emotional distress, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. The effects from small doses will last 3 to 6 hours, and heavier doses 12 to 24 hours. As much fun as that sounds. Ayahuasca, or yage, is a psychedelic drink made from the bark, leaves, and the vines of species of trees in the Amazon jungle. The drink causes intense vomiting and diarrhea. So let's all take it. Why not? Let's all puke and have the squirts before it deposits the drinker in a dreamlike state for about 10 hours. So you have diarrhea, you vomit all over the place, and then you trip out for 10 hours. Which, I don't know, is it worth it or is it not? Select tribes of natives in Peru, Brazil, Ecuador use the drug for divination, prophecy, sorcery, and medicinal purposes. Cults have sprung up in Brazil around the use of this substance. The active ingredient is indole alkaloid harmaline, and that's ayahuasca, or yage. This group of psychedelics, the phenyl alkylamines psychedelics are related to adrenaline and amphetamines, though their effects tend to last longer. The best known phenylalkylamine psychedelic is peyote or mescaline. Mescaline is the active ingredient in the peyote cactus and the San Pedro cactus. The use of these cacti for religious insight and rituals dates back 4,000 to 5,000 years among the native tribes of Mexico, Central and South America. So they've used peyote for an extended length of time. In North America, 50 tribal groups were still using the drug for religious purposes into the 20th century. And of course, this eventually became the Native American Church. 1996, the Supreme Court finally allowed this group, which had been using these peyote for 100 years, religious freedom. So there you go. Native American Church. Native American Church, of course, started with, what's his name? Quanah Parker in Comanche country. War chief, one of the war chiefs of the last war chief of the Comanche tribe. Mescaline is found in the small gray-green crowns of the peyote cacti. They can be used dried or fresh. The buttons can either be eaten or boiled in a tea. The mescaline is bitter and nauseating and may take as many as 7 to 8 buttons to elicit a response. The effects last up to 12 hours and results in colorful visions and hallucinations. And there you go. MDA or MDMA, also known as ecstasy, is the rave drug. It was first synthesized in 1910. These drugs have a similar chemical structure to mescaline. They produce the effects of a feeling of well-being. They give you a feeling of euphoria. There is a psychedelic stimulatory effect. If you've ever been to a rave, a lot of very loud and repetitive music that seems to be what people like on MDMA and MDA. MDA was popular as the love drug in the 1960s and 1970s as it was supposed to increase the libido. In other words, it made people horny. Yeah, I can say that. I can use the word horny, can I? Am I okay? Is there anybody that's under the age of 17 in here? Okay. It was later found to destroy serotonin-producing neurons in the brain along with a few overdose deaths. It made it less popular. Theoretically, it increased the libido. The reality is it increased feelings of well-being, it increased feelings of euphoria. Had nothing to do with your libido, even though they called it the love drug. And there are side effects to MDMA. Am I going to talk about it? I can't remember. MDMA, or ecstasy, was developed to produce the same effects as MDA, but with fewer side effects. MDMA lasts for 4 to 6 hours compared to 10 to 12 hours for MDA. It is popular as a rave drug as it is reputed to make the individual dance and interact with other people at a party. And if you've ever been around somebody on this stuff, they do a lot of hugging. And they just feel an affinity for other people, and they'll just hug everybody, as bizarre as that seems. The drug was tested for its psychological impact by the United States Army in the 1950s, but instead was touted as a drug that would help therapists tap into emotions and memories of repressed patients. It was used in this capacity in the late 70s and early 80s. This is another drug that they thought we could use to tap into people's emotions. It was found to create empathy in its user. Remember, this is the one that makes people hug everybody else. Street vendors changed the emotion empathy to ecstasy to improve sales, of course. They said it increased your libido, made people want to have sex. The reality is it doesn't really do that. But, you know, if somebody tells you it's going to do that, maybe it will. People taking MDMA experience intensified senses of smell, which makes the use of strong smelling substances like Vicks Vapor Rub and Vicks inhalers and Tiger Balm popular at raves. So if you wander around a rave, you get to smell a lot of Bengay, which it sounds kind of silly, but that's okay. They'll stick those Vicks inhalers in their noses, one in each nostril, and that's a strong smell. Anyway, these guys have a real strong affinity for odors. Glow sticks are waved in front of ecstasy users to create a mesmerizing effect. MDMA tablets cost pirate manufacturers from 50 cents to $2 to make, but they sell it for as much as $10 to $70 depending on the market. DEA reports that 30 to 50% of MDMA sold isn't really MDMA at all. But sometimes it's antihistamines, sometimes it's cool capsules, but most of the stuff that they sell is MDMA, well, not most of it, but some of the stuff that they sell as MDMA isn't real. But, guess what? They still have exactly the same reaction. Placebo effect. If you think it's going to work, it's going to work. The effects of MDMA are similar to amphetamines that begin to appear about 30 minutes after ingestion. Of course, if you take amphetamines, you have a reaction much quicker than that, but MDMA starts working after 30 minutes. You have increased heart rate and respiration, excess energy, fainting, sweating, chills, hyperactivity. You salivate a lot. And for this reason, people who have taken ecstasy or MDMA will suck on pacifiers, as weird as that may seem. So if you're ever at a bar or you're someplace where people are cool, they may have a pacifier hanging from their neck on a string, and that's cool. That's cool. They salivate like crazy. They also get really hot. So the biggest problem they have with ecstasy is that these people will have, they'll go into heat prostration. So if you've ever been to one of these things in Europe, they'll have them in great big warehouses. Usually they're refrigerated warehouses because they have to turn the temperature down, way down. Otherwise these people will cook. And they do die. They will dehydrate and die. And of course they're salivating like crazy. They're sweating like a pig. Actually, pigs don't sweat as much as we do. But they're sweating a lot. They are salivating a lot. Their body temperature is way too high. So if you don't keep them cool and you don't keep them hydrated, these individuals will die. They'll dehydrate and die. And so that's one of the things that... So they will have people wandering around who are trying to take care of everybody to make sure that nobody dies at this thing. You know, Amsterdam, Berlin, Frankfurt, Paris. You know, they have these raves all over Europe, and they have to have them in refrigerated buildings in order to keep the individual from dying. Hyperactivity is another problem. That's why they're dancing. They do a lot of dancing. So there's a lot of activity. So despite the fact that they're sweating a lot, they're also overly active. So they're producing a lot of heat. They have tightening of the jaw muscles, especially the jaw muscles, and they have to clench their teeth. For that reason, sometimes they will clench their teeth so much that they will break their teeth off. And this is another reason for that baby pacifier. They chew on that thing. Sometimes you see them, they will have bitten the end of it off, and they're chewing on the part, that other part. Infrequent use leads to heightened responses. Heavier use leads to rapid tolerance, which is the biggest problem. So if you drop if you drop ecstasy every weekend, pretty soon you're not having the same reaction that you did before. You build up a tolerance level fairly rapidly. Overuse of MDMA may result in dehydration, that may result in water toxicity and electrolyte imbalance. When I was at Mississippi University for Women, I had a student from Switzerland, and she was a raver. Well, she was a raver back in Europe. Of course, this is Mississippi. Nobody raves in Mississippi. They play the wrong music. Anyway, she was the grouchiest lady I had ever been around. And the reason is because she had dropped so much of this stuff that she had destroyed her serotonin-producing cells. She was really not a very pleasant person. Unless she was on this stuff. And of course, I never saw her on this stuff, but I just saw her in class. She was not a very happy person, never smiled. Just really bizarre. Anyway, okay, so you've got lots of potential problems here. Your pupils dilate, you have blurred vision and eyelid twitching, which is always cute. Headaches, agitation, nausea, and anorexia. The headaches come from dehydration. Serotonergic axon apoptosis resulting in thought and memory impairment. In other words, it destroys the serotonin-producing cells in your raphe nuclei. Rapid and potentially dangerous heart rhythm problems, and this is caused by the dehydration also. Seizure activity caused by the dehydration, stroke, cardiovascular failure and coma, malignant hyperthermia that can result in muscle damage, renal failure, and even blood coagulation. Really, really serious. And this is one of the reasons why there are so many people who aren't on ecstasy wandering around these raves looking to make sure that nobody's having a convulsion. Now here's the bizarre part. So you're in the middle of all these people that are taking ecstasy, and one of you collapses in a coma. Now everybody wants to hug everybody else. Everybody has these really positive feelings about everybody else. So why don't they help that person? They can't see anything negative. They don't perceive any negativity. So they'll just watch that person convulse and die. That's why they have all these people walking around trying to keep people from dying. They had a really serious problem with this in Amsterdam, with people dying at raves, and so they closed them down. They wouldn't let them. They did the same thing that we do with our cold capsules. We hide them behind the counter. Well, they were doing the same thing with all these refrigerated warehouses. They made sure that they didn't set up a rave. Anyway, because people would just ignore them, just watch them die. As horrible as that sounds. 20 to 60 minutes after ingestion MDMA and lasting for 3 to 4 hours, after ingesting MDMA and lasting for 3 to 4 hours, the drug changes the feelings of the user. You have feelings of happiness, you have feelings of clarity, you have feelings of peace, you have feelings of pleasure, altered sensory perceptions without depersonalization or detachment from the environment, non-sexual empathy for others, self-awareness, heightened self-esteem, open-mindedness, acceptance and intimacy. None of this has to do with trying to save that person's life. You have all of these positive feelings, and you cannot see anything negative. You miss it. They're sleeping. Oh, they look so cute when they're sleeping and jerking. Anyway. Now remember, they started marketing this stuff as a libido increaser. But the reality is the empathy that you feel for others is completely non-sexual. So it's kind of like heroin. You take heroin, there's no such thing as a heroin whore. When you're on heroin, the last thing you want to do is have sex. Well, maybe not the last thing, but pretty close to the last thing. It's the same way with this stuff. This is not something that makes you want to get down and dirty and have fun. MDMA's psychic effects are probably produced by its overstimulation of the serotonergic producing neurons in the brain. MDMA forces the discharge of the reservoir of serotonin into the synaptic clefts. If more MDMA is taken when the effects begin to wear off, the response is a reduced reaction. So just like everything else, you can't overdose on this stuff. It just doesn't doesn't work. You have the same effect. And if you try to take more, you have less of an effect. It just dampens it. Serotonin receptors may retreat into their cell membranes to avoid damage. They downregulate. It may take up to a week to regenerate enough serotonin to produce the same effect. So now we got a problem. Not only do we have a problem, you're really happy while you do this, but once you're done, your serotonin receptors have downregulated, and now you're not happy at all. So it's almost like kicking yourself into depression. I know, I'll take this drug, I'll be really happy for 10 to 12 hours, and then I'll be depressed for a week. That sounds like fun. Let's do it. After use, MDMA users may experience extreme depression and suicidal thoughts. Because of the downregulation of serotonin receptors, tolerance to the drug is fairly rapid. Of course, the human brain, as I keep telling you, is trying to protect itself. So you're downregulated to keep from overstimulating your serotonin-producing receptors in your brain. Because of the questionable content of tablets said to be MDMA, polydrug use is common. LSD is taken with MDMA to increase the time the MDMA effects last. Remember, MDMA only lasts for 2 to 4 hours, but LSD lasts for up to 12 hours. This is known, if you take LSD and MDMA at the same time, it's known as candy flipping, flip-flopping, X and L's, or candy snaps, as cool as that is. MDMA with hydrocodone, OxyContin, codeine, or heroin can enhance the euphoric feelings of both drugs. GHB, remember GHB, the rape drug. GHB with MDMA, a form of modern day speedballing. Nitrous oxide in MDMA intensifies the inhalant rush. Prozac and MDMA are used together to buffer the serotonergic cells from toxicity. MDMA and Viagra, are you kidding me? Sorry. MDMA and Viagra are taken together to enhance sexuality and referred to as sextasy instead of ecstasy. There you go. Viagra, what happens if a woman takes Viagra? What happens if a woman takes Viagra? Any ideas? No idea. That's what you. Well, you were right when you went like that. Nothing happens. So this would only work if a man took the MDMA and Viagra. And remember, well, how's the lady feeling about it? Well, one of the things she's feeling is non-sexual empathy for others. So. MDMA has been maintained because of popularity with people who attend raves, dance parties, and electronic dance clubs. A strong beat, a strong bass. That's what they're looking for. The constant beat. Rave and club music is also known as techno and maintains a trance-like beat that may be accompanied by light shows and laser light effects. Now remember, these people are really sensitive to this kind of stuff. You can hypnotize them with one of those glow stick things. So these types of dances, you'll see them just bouncing all over the place at one of these raves or whatever. These events are usually accompanied with the use of many illegal drugs that include MDMA, nitrous oxide, GHB or GBL, dextromethorphan, which is that cough syrup stuff, ketamine, which we used to use to knock people out, to anesthetize people during Vietnam. It's also known as a rape drug, but you can knock people out with it. PCP, Nexus, any street drugs other than alcohol. Alcohol kind of ruins the effect of MDMA. So you don't drink and take MDMA at the same time. At raves, you very rarely see any alcohol. It really messes things up. One of the things about raves and one of the things about ecstasy and MDMA and MDA is the fact that everybody feels love for each other. Alcohol, a lot of times there's violence attached to it. People want to fight, especially Americans. When I was stationed in Europe, they'd have beer tents. You know, Germans do the beer tent thing all the time, and you get the Canadians would come over, and the English would come over, and the Germans would come over, and of course the Americans would be there, and what would happen? The Americans would want to fight everybody. It was really ridiculous. And then the Canadians would kick their asses. The Germans would sleep. You know, the Brits are kind of sitting there. And I don't know if you've ever tried to have a fight with a Brit. They want to hit you in the head. They want to hit you in the face with their forehead. They have their head butters. Anyway, it was a mess. Of course, I'm not a drinker, so. And I was working in the emergency room, and of course, every time they had one of these things, they call out the National Guard. They call up all the troops, and we'd have to go in there and clean them out with all the cops. And of course, they needed medics because all these people had broken noses. What a mess. Anyway, that's not. So the Americans want to fight. The Americans always wanted to fight. No matter who they were, they always wanted to fight. And no matter who they were fighting. Germans are a lot bigger than Americans, most of them. Really big people. Anyway. Problems at raves usually come from other drug use. If you try to mix alcohol with anything else, now we've got violence and empathy going at the same time. Doesn't work. You've got one person trying to fight, the other person trying to hug the same person. Methamphetamines, of course, was a mess. LSD worked. GHB and ketamine, of course, those are all, well, GHB and ketamine are rape drugs, so you have to be careful with those. MDMA effects that can cause problems are usually in the form of overheating, falling injuries, passing out, bad psychedelic experiences, and mental destabilization. There, I got it. Okay. Okay. Destabilization. What do I have in my lemonade this morning? Destabilization. There you go. Okay, I'm okay. But I did forget my phone. I don't know what time it is. It's got a time. I'm sorry?
10 a.m. 10 o'clock.
10, right on the nose, 20 minutes? Okay, I can do that. Two drugs that are popular as rape drugs in the Netherlands are 2CT7 and 2CT2, also known as Blue Mystic, Tripstasy, Seventh Heaven, 7-Up, Lucky 7, Beautiful. If you go to Europe and somebody invites you to a rave, be really careful of what they're giving you. It could be LSD, it could be MDMA, it could be some of this stuff. This stuff comes in as a blue liquid, so you have to be really careful what you're drinking and what you're taking. And of course, they're going to say something like, "Hey, you know, this is nothing like ecstasy. You'll just have a good time. You're just taking this for a good time. Be really careful." The drugs are psychostimulants and cause the following effects. It induces delirium, heightened sensitivity, increased awareness, nausea and vomiting, which is always a lot of fun. That's what I go to dance clubs for, to vomit and to have diarrhea. Common cardiovascular responses, of course, dangerous cardiovascular responses. That's kind of interesting. Nexus, we talked about Nexus before. It's a trade name for 2CB or 4-bromo-2,5-dimethoxyphenethylamine. It creates mild stimulation at low doses and intense psychedelic experiences at high doses. This is an amphetamine-like chemical, Nexus. I know it doesn't sound like much, but it's really strong stuff, so you got to be careful what you're taking. When was I in Europe? I was over there 79 through 82, and all the raves were really popular back then. So we were getting these guys into the emergency room from time to time. I mean, somebody would drop something in their drink, or I don't know. Anyway, we get them and they thought they were having a psychotic episode. And sometimes they actually were having a psychotic episode, but we had to hold on to them until their brain stabilized. STP is the street name for that, and is also known as Dom, Serenity, Tranquility, and Peace. It is similar to MDA as it produces a 12-hour intoxication that results in intense stimulation. Mild psychedelic reactions. It is notorious for producing bad trips, STP. And of course, we have this stuff in the United States. STP, if you remember back in when you were a child back in the 1960s and 1970s, I'm kidding, none of you were alive back then. But STP was an additive for your car. If you know anything about the Indianapolis 500, the STP always sponsored a car in the Indianapolis 500. Anyway, STP, that's where it got its name from that.
It boosts the gas mileage in your vehicle. Right?
Yeah, you put it in your gas line and it cleaned out your gas, theoretically, cleaned out your carburetor, cleaned out your gas line, cleaned all the carbon off your carburetor, you know, all that kind of stuff. So you didn't have to you didn't have to clean up, you didn't have to take your carburetor out and clean it and soak it in gasoline or anything. This stuff was supposed to clean it up. Jerry Agajanian was the guy that owned STP. Anyway, not that that's important. That's where it got its name. But this stuff is notorious for producing bad trips. So like I said, if you go to Europe and somebody says, hey, you know, you want to have a good time? Here, take this pill. It's not very strong. It may be this stuff. And it's going to make you feel this way, but of course, there's always a possibility that you're going to have a bad trip. And they may be just trying to get you drunk. They may try to get you to pass out so they can do strange things to you. PMA or 4MA is the street name for paramethioxyamphetamine. It is a stimulant. Effects only last for an hour and leaves the user with a sudden rise in blood pressure, distinct after images, pins and needles tingly, feeling like a chill or a person's hair standing on end, seizures, hyperthermia, coagulation of blood, and muscle damage. So there you go. You have a good time for an hour and then you die from a blood clot, which is always fun. Bromo dragonfly is also known as bee fly or fly. It is a powerful hallucinogen that has a longer duration than any other hallucinogen, sometimes lasting for days. It produces hallucinations, delusions, and memory loss. Not the best idea in the world. Belladonna is a small plant found throughout the world that has been used for eons by women wanting to make their eyes more striking. It dilates your pupils. Now here's the deal. If your pupils dilate, let's say that you're looking at somebody and you're attracted to that person. What happens is that your eyes will automatically dilate. Now, men that are smart will look at a woman's eyes and they can tell if that woman is attracted to them because her eyes will dilate. I've never experienced it myself, but other people tell me. I read about it all the time. If your eyes dilate, it means that you're attracted to somebody. So a man that knows how to pick women up, that's what he'll look for in a woman's eyes. He'll look to see if her pupils dilate. And if they do dilate, then he knows that he's got a chance. And of course, he's going to make a play for her, and potentially, of course, if she's really attracted to him, then he will be able to seduce her. Belladonna is Italian for beautiful woman. Belladonna blocks acetylcholine receptors in the central nervous system to produce delirium, inability to focus your eyes, tachycardia, intense thirst, hyperthermia to the point of death, hallucinations, separation from reality, and sleep for up to 48 hours. So if you take too much of this stuff, you put it in your eyes, and it makes your eyes dilate, so everybody thinks you're attracted to them. All the men think you're attracted to them. If you put too much of it in there, you go to sleep for 48 hours, maybe forever. Jimson weed is a psychedelic plant found throughout the United States where its seeds are eaten, brewed into a tea, or the leaves are made into cigarettes and also known as thornapple, angel's trumpet, Jamestown weed, mad apple, moonflower, or stinkweed. And you got it around here. I've seen it on the trail as I was running around your campus. You've got this stuff out there. Jimson weed. The substance produces the following effects: jerky movements, which are always attractive, tachycardia, where your heart beats really fast, Hypotension. Yeah. Hallucination of snakes, spiders, and lizards. Hallucinations, that's always fun. Anyway, Jimson weed, you've got it out there. Ketamine is an anesthetic used with both humans and animals and is a close chemical relative of PCP, though ketamine is shorter lived than PCP is. Ketamine was the most widely used anesthetic during the Vietnam War. So if you can find a medical kit from Vietnam, it's going to have this stuff in it. Ketamine's going to be in there. We had, when I was in Vietnam, of course, we used it, but we had a medical kit in the laboratory in Lubbock, Texas, when I was stationed at Reese Air Force Base, and there was just a ton of ketamine in there. Not exactly sure why, but that was our supply of ketamine for Reese Air Force Base. It was liked because it does not affect the patient's breathing, but it was the additional side effects of dissociation, feeling like you're outside of yourself. And of course, this is a problem that we had after they came out of recovery. They didn't feel like they were themselves. And this lasted for a couple days. So you had to hold on to somebody. You treated them, they went through recovery, and then you had to hold on to them for a couple days, because otherwise, who knows what would have happened. The liquid is crystallized and the crystals are smoked in a pipe or snorted to the effects of mild dreamlike intoxication, sensation of mind-body separation, dizziness, free-floating giddiness, slurred speech, impaired muscular coordination. And that's another reason why we couldn't let them get up and go out and do something, because they might hurt themselves. Heavy doses of ketamine produce the psychedelic experience known as being in a K-hole, where the individual feels as if they are having an out-of-body, near-death experience of depersonalization, hallucination, delirium, bizarre or mystical experiences. They can feel no pain, which is not that exciting. That's one of the reasons why you can't let them get up. If you let them get up, then they will potentially walk on a broken leg because they can't feel it. They don't feel any pain. Now that's a positive and a negative at the same time. Pain tells you when you're not supposed to do something. Ouch, that hurts. I'll limp from now on. But with ketamine, you don't feel anything. So a lot of times they damage themselves. And that's one of the reasons why we had to hold on to them for a couple of days. They feel no pain, respiratory depression, increased heart rate and blood pressure, combative or belligerent behavior, convulsions, and sometimes they'll go into a coma, not very often. And the combative and belligerent behavior is not a whole lot of fun either. That's why we had to tie them down a lot. Phencyclidine hydrochloride, PCP, was developed in the 1950s as a general anesthetic for humans. Unfortunately, the drug had toxic and hallucinogenic side effects, and it was relegated to the use with animals only, not for human consumption. It is also known as angel dust, peeps, KJ, Sherman's, or ozone. It is sometimes sprinkled on marijuana and smoked in a joint. It can be smoked, snorted, swallowed, or injected. PCP. PCP seems to disconnect sensory messages sent to the central nervous system, dissolving inhibitions, deadening your pain, strange feeling of mind-body separation, forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, aggressive and violent behavior, extremely aggressive and extremely violent behavior. Depersonalization, 40% report hallucinations, tactile, visual, or auditory. Damage can be done by the individual to themselves by overstressing muscles, sinews, and flesh. You can't stop them. You can cut their arms off and they'll swing their stubs at you. This is nuts. These people feel no pain, and they feel nothing. You have to kill them. If they come after you, there's nothing you can do but kill them. You can't knock them out. And that's what they thought, that guy that all the cops almost beat to death, that's what they thought he was on, PCP. He kept getting up. They kept hitting him, They crushed his skull, and he kept getting up and trying to fight them. Well, he had blacked out is what had happened, but they thought he was on PCP. And with somebody with PCP, there's nothing you can do. You can shoot him, and if you don't kill him, they'll keep coming. It's just bizarre. Low doses of PCP produce mild depression and then stimulation and last for 1 to 2 hours. Moderate doses of PCP produce an intense sensory deprived state and last for 4 to 6 hours. Heavy doses of PCP produce catatonia, coma, convulsions, and kidney failure and can last for up to 48 hours. And this is when we get them in the emergency room, when they've taken too much. You can overdose on PCP. And of course they come in, their kidneys aren't working, they're in a coma, they're having convulsions, and a lot of times we can't save them. But of course we try, we always try. The general drug-using population does not routinely use PCP because of the high frequency of bad trips. However, people are so damn smart that they think that they know exactly how much to take, so they have a small reaction. A lot of times they take a little bit too much and then they flip into this situation. In that situation they become aggressive, they feel no pain, and now all of a sudden we got a problem. But of course, if they take too much, then they're in this situation, and now they've really got a problem. And anterograde and retrograde amnesia is common with the use of PCP. And the other problem is they don't remember a damn thing. So they might have, beaten their child to death and they don't remember it. Or they may have beaten their wife to death. Usually it's not their kids, it's usually their wives that they're beating to death. Salvia divinorum is a member of the mint family and produces psychedelic effects when ingested. It creates dreamlike hallucinations, occasional delirium, and out-of-body sensations. When smoked, the effects last for only 7 to 10 minutes. The key ingredient is salvorin. At present, the drug is legal, but under review for scheduling, so you trip out for 7 to 10 minutes. Amanita mushrooms have been used for rituals as far back as the Neanderthal man. That's before the Cro-Magnon man came to the fore. The mushroom causes dreamy intoxication, hallucinations, delirious excitement, physical toxic effects that can be deadly. The effects start 30 minutes after ingestion and last for 4 to 8 hours. Active ingredient resemble the inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA. Too much of the mushroom will make the user sick as if they have food poisoning, which is a lot of fun. Food poisoning, the whole vomiting thing? Okay. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes. I can do it. Dextromethorphan. This is good stuff. This is the stuff that's in cough syrups. There you go. Thanks, Chris. I say cough syrup, you start coughing. Dextromethorphan is the active ingredient in many of the cough syrups, including Robitussin DM, Coricidin, and Romalar. 10 to 15 times the recommended dose can give the user, you're supposed to swallow it one time, not a whole bottle, okay? There's like 20 swallows in that bottle, and you're supposed to swallow it one time. These guys are drinking the whole damn bottle. 10 to 15 times the recommended dose can give the user euphoria, mind-body separation, auditory and visual hallucinations, loss of coordination, dilated pupils, decreased orgasm. I'm not exactly sure why you do that. Nausea and upset stomach, itching, rashes, fever, tachycardia, acute anxiety, and panic reactions. This was real popular in the clubs of Hollywood. The rappers. You can listen to select rap songs and they talk about drinking cough syrup at the club and going out and acting the fool. Actually, they don't say acting the fool. Dancing around, all of a sudden you can do anything because you're high. But that's what they were doing. A lot of people have overdosed on this stuff. Too many people have overdosed on this stuff.
Can you have seizures with it?
Yes. Yeah. Drink the whole damn bottle. See if it happens.
Well, no, because I gave my son some one time.
And he started having seizures?
I think it was a seizure, yeah. I mean, I didn't give him like the whole bottle.
Of course not. Why would you do that? And you gave him the children's dosage anyway,
Yeah.
probably. Yeah.
It seemed like it was a seizure.
Yeah, it's probably the dextromethorphan that caused it. He's a little sensitive to dextromethorphan. However, you build up a fairly rapid tolerance to this stuff. So the next time you gave it to him, if you ever tried to give it to him again, he probably wouldn't have any reaction at all. Probably not. But being the person that I am, I wouldn't give him the second dose. No, I wouldn't do it. Probably not. Did he have whooping cough or croup?
I don't
Or?
know. I don't remember. It was like only, he was less than a year old,
Okay.
and, or a year old or
Sure.
over, I can't remember. But I gave him some, and then, like, about maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, it looked like he was having like seizures and everything. And then it went away, so we didn't take him to the hospital or anything like that.
No, he took care of it.
But we
himself.
never gave it to him again. We just figured that he was allergic.
Yeah. Which is what you could say. I mean, he was allergic to it. He was overly sensitive to it. Nutmeg and mace come from the nutmeg tree. In heavy doses, they can cause mild floating sensations to full-blown delirium. Such heavy doses do have their price. Nutmeg has a bad hangover, severely upset stomach, of course. This combination is rarely used outside of prisons where other psychedelics are unavailable. These guys will want to work in the cafeteria where they can get hold of this stuff. They eat it, and of course it makes them feel like they've been drunk, a real bad drunk. But at the same time, at least they get a little bit of a high. Nutmeg is the easiest thing in the world to overdose on, and it doesn't take very much to overdose. This is almost as dangerous as heroin. So we see a lot of overdoses in the prisons. Is it time now?
Yeah.
Well, let's stop. Let's go ahead and stop. We'll talk about marijuana next time.